It's on. We're all good to go. Okay, how are y'all doing the day after the Super Bowl? Good? Good? Yeah, go Chiefs. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful state of Kansas or Missouri or wherever that is. That's uh oh, sorry, I thought you said something already. Okay, so here, looking ahead, a couple of things for us. Just looking at the rest of this week. So today we're going to try to finish hierarchy of research. There's a couple of things that we got to do. You have roommates?
I have one.
Ditch them.
Huh?
Ditch them. Live alone. It's a lot better. Gosh. Back to this. Focus, self. Hierarchy of research, part 2. That's what we're trying to get through today. Next time, we're going to have a quiz either at the beginning or the end of class. I'm not going to tell you about it. I want you to read the case report on Canvas. Read through that. It's about like exercise training, peripheral neuropathy, and diabetes, and some things that happened with it. I'm not going to ask you anything too crazy specific, but you will have needed to read it in order to not fail it. Everyone good with that? Yeah. And all of you that have had like my quizzes before, it's probably going to be like kind of open-ended answers, things like that. Just a couple, like no more than 5, I would not assume. I actually haven't written the quiz for it yet, but I will. I will probably tonight. Something else that I want you to look at through Canvas, there's something called the dissection of an academic paper example. If you download it, it's technically called CrossFit Keto. I want you to read that as well. Neither of these are too long, and if I was reading both of these, I would read much more in depth the case report and less so with CrossFit Keto, because the CrossFit Keto, that's actually a paper that I wrote, and I'm going to be teaching you how to dissect an academic paper on that day, and we'll follow that up on the following Monday. So, because there's approximately 12 different dimensions of dissecting a paper, and I'm going to go through all of them fairly in depth with you, and that's actually a project or a paper that you're going to have to do on your own in this class. Next thing on Friday, location of research, that's due. So those of you that have already turned it in, I think everyone who's turned it in has done very well already. So make sure to turn that in. It's due by midnight on Friday. I'm only meeting with groups 4, 5, 6, and 7. So if you're not in those groups, don't come to campus, or you can come to campus if you have other things to do, like work out. That's a good, healthy thing to do on a Friday, work out during this class. Also, read the animal trial that day. So quite a bit of reading coming up. Everyone good with this? Everyone know? Yes, Mike? Yes.
Where do you find these on campus?
Where? Canvas. So where do you find these? Good question. So this is research methods. Okay, so here I'm going to go to student view so you can see it. All right, things, no, paper project outlines. Dissecting an academic paper example, that's where that is. So it's under test 1 materials.
Okay, that's where that keto.
Yes, the CrossFit Keto and papers to read for quizzes, case report, it's right there.
Oh, okay.
All good with this? Has anyone opened these yet? You have? Okay, and like you can open them and stuff? Okay, perfect. Perfect. It's still going. Cool. Awesome. So, like, make sure to do all of that, everybody. Good stuff. All right. Any questions about what's coming up? No? No? Sorry. All right, cool. Moving on. So, like, a couple of new people came in here. I was just putting y'all into groups. So, Jared, I put you in that group. So, your name's going to go in with group 3 here after a while. Cool. So, that's who everyone's with. Just wanted to get that clarified. And Steven's here now, so that's good. All right. So, what can research do? This is where we ended last time. So, a couple of things with like what science is, what the scientific method is. We already talked about all that. So make sure that you read and like review that, like observable, testable, falsifiable, all of that. But now moving into like what research can do. So here are all of the different things that research can do. I really just want you to be aware of this and more or less know the kind of examples that I'm giving, nothing like too inherently specific. So first off with like categorize. So research can categorize different things, right? So this is fairly obvious, I think, like kind of like taxonomy, like putting different animals into like kingdoms, phylums, classes, orders, so on and so forth, right? But if we think about this more broadly, it can do other things, like degree of growing strains and like what's to be expected from that. So that's a little bit more of a more sport-specific example. So like I'm not really good with athletic training type stuff, but like there's a like level of loss of function in different tests in order to like categorize and or like decide if a growing strain is like grade 1 to grade 3 and all of that. Is everyone good with this? That makes sense? So just overall, place things in a particular class or group. That's overall what categorization means. So the next thing, describe. So this is somewhat related to the qualitative stuff that we talked about prior, but here I'm just going to read this to you. So give an account in words of something, of someone or something, including all the relevant characteristics, qualities, or events. So a lot of the times, this can be a qualitative analysis or like a cross-sectional analysis of, here's one thing that I think of, for example. There was a pretty big survey done on athletes in college, so Division I through Division III, about where they get where they get all of their nutrition and like supplement information from. And it turned out that they got most of it like either online or from medical doctors. Now that's probably not the best places to get it because medical doctors don't frequently know those types of things, but that could describe like where people get a particular aspect of information and maybe how we could alter it or like kind of alter education of individuals so that, you know, we could change things, right? So going on there. Or here's another one, a descriptive study. So frequently studies that describe actually have descriptive in the title of it. So here, I've actually talked about this in health appraisal before. Very interesting study. So it's from the National Weight Control Registry. So individuals who have lost a vast amount of weight, what does it say, like over 30 kilograms? So that's a lot. That's a lot. And like in terms of like, you know, American freedom units, right? That's like 60, 70 pounds or more. So a fair bit to lose. Yeah, I think that math is a bit wrong in my head, but that's okay. And what are the habits that they did or that are common amongst individuals that lost that? So kind of a description of individuals that like lost weight and then maintained their weight loss, which I don't know if anybody knows, overall in the research, losing weight is very easy. Just starve yourself. It works. But maintaining it up to 6 months or a year afterward, that's actually more confusing. And the National Weight Registry like study here, this descriptive study, is trying to describe how individuals actually do that. Are y'all good with this? So overall, in the description, just giving an account, that type of stuff. All right. Next thing, explaining. So this is more or less answering the how or the why of like why something happens. So what I'm pulling up right here, well, here, I'll read this to you really quick. So the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. So the how or the why. Right here, what I pulled up is the role of mitochondrial oxidative stress in aging. So explaining something. Here's a big question that has kind of messed with researchers for a very long period of time. Why do we age? Right? So research has been trying to answer that question, and there's numerous like competitive hypotheses for why we age. Like one of the ones that like I'm partial to, even though it's probably not right, is the role of like oxidative stress and free radicals. Like does everyone know what like metal looks like? You know, so like metal can rust, right? So the idea is that effectively we rust from the inside out. And there's been various experiments like inducing a certain amount of like free radical or oxidative damage and seeing like what the relationship is with aging. There's also other ideas called like antagonistic pleiotropy, but that doesn't really matter because I'm not going too in depth in any of these. It's just trying to explain a natural phenomena or process that goes on. So on from there. This next thing, evaluation. So I think the best way to think about this is say you have an idea. I don't know. I hate to be a broken record, but I'm probably just going to be in this class because there's only so many things that I've researched recently and that I'm interested in. But say you have an idea like about weight loss, like what's the best way to make people lose weight? And then you essentially just evaluate it. You put a bunch of people on that program or whatever your idea is, and then you just see what happens. Now, frequently you'll have a control group and you'll have somewhat of a comparison, but that's kind of what's going on there. Like here, this study, bless you, neuromuscular training for rehabilitation of sports injuries. So every individual who's like played sports has probably been injured at some point. So what even is the effectiveness of doing different neuromuscular training techniques, right? And like probably not crazy effective, but maybe somewhat effective. And like there's different neuromuscular training techniques that like are evaluated in this review. It was actually a really interesting read. It's been a while since I've read it, but that's really what evaluation means. Next thing is comparison. And this one, I don't know, I would say is probably the most common in types of research that you'll likely read in the future. So take, for example, if we're trying to have someone lose weight, there's numerous competing hypotheses for how like you could make somebody lose weight. So research would effectively like put a set of people on like this one protocol, another set of people on this other protocol, another set of people on this other protocol, and then compare at how all of them are losing or not losing weight, for example. And like here, cool study. I actually know everybody on this study. It was pretty fun. And as we go throughout the semester, we might actually look into this a little bit more. I'm not sure. So right here, what it's called, you'll see like studies have arbitrarily long names for no reason. Effects of whey, soy, and leucine supplementation with 12 weeks of resistance training on strength, body composition, and skeletal muscle and adipose tissue histological attributes in college-age males. So whenever I was at Auburn, we did this, and like I called it our like frat guy protein study because it was actually only frat guys that were in the study. It was pretty fun. So we could have subdivided the analysis by which fraternity and which protein supplement that they were put on. However, we didn't. We only compared like whey protein versus soy protein versus like some type of like leucine mixture in order to see how much muscle mass people gain. Because like if anybody's like in the industry or you've read anything, different protein powders have different effectivenesses, right? Right? I mean, like whey protein is probably the best. Like milk protein does something, soy protein does another thing, and like rice and hemp protein and pea protein and like whatever you're into. Now we found none of them had any differences. So that's what we found. I thought that was kind of cool. So our comparison essentially failed within that study. But that's an example of a type of study that would seek to compare different things for a chosen outcome or dependent variable. Correlation, I think all of us know what correlation is. Whenever y'all are taught about correlation in other classes, what do people say? What's up, Sophia?
Like two things are related, but one doesn't cause the other.
Oh, right. So Sophia is 100% right. Correlation is not causation, right? So just because two things are related does not mean that they cause each other. But as you'll see later on, whenever we go over the Bradford-Hill criteria for causality, if two things are not correlated, then they can't cause each other. So actually correlation is more or less the first step to causation. So that's one thing that I think a lot of people actually miss. Like, I don't know, there's just various things that we end up memorizing, right, that are true-ish, but essentially a half-truth, I guess. So here, a mutual relationship or connection between two or more things, and we'll talk about, various groups are actually doing a correlation statistic, and hopefully they will explain it more to you throughout things. Now here, this is an example of a spurious correlation. So spurious correlation, if you don't know what that means, it essentially just is a correlation between two things that are completely not related. So essentially, by virtue of accident, these two things are related. So right here, no one laughed, so I assume no one read it, because like this is pretty funny, right? And especially since we're in Wisconsin, and like it would be so cool if we could show that like cheese consumption in Wisconsin is the highest. Like we have data on that. Like for sure, per capita, people consume more cheese in Wisconsin than anywhere else on at least the United States. But like, what if we could show that more people died by becoming entangled in their bed sheets in Wisconsin? Now, it kind of makes sense. Like whenever, like during the winter, whenever the sun sets at like 2 p.m., I'm in my bed relatively early, and I think about hanging myself. But so like that would be cool. That would be cool if we could show that, right? But like we probably can't. Next thing, prediction. This is probably one of the biggest things that science likes to try to do, but doesn't always do a great job with. So prediction, say or estimate that a specified thing will happen in the future or will be a consequence of something else, right? So like we frequently hear about this with different things like climate change, like you need to go to college so that you'll make a lot of money. Like all of these things are like different like prediction variables, right? Is everyone good with this? Right? Now, some things that I think are interesting. There was a book called Super Forecasters by a guy named Philip Tetlock, and he followed, it was a couple of decades of different individuals like on the news trying to predict something, and just various things. And numerous experts and things like that. And he found that experts, whenever they try to predict things, are no better than novice people that like are just guessing. So I don't know. Like I think frequently scientists need to be like have a little bit more humility whenever we try to predict things, because well, I don't know. There's always like diminishing returns, and well, here like I'll just draw this, right? So like everyone understands like y equals mx plus b, so y equals mx plus b. So here, b being like the y-intercept there, and x being like the degree of the slope, or rise over run, or whatever the hell you want to call it, right? So here's a problem whenever we predict things. We assume that we actually got the correct x. But do most things continue to go up at the same slope throughout all time? No. Like they frequently like plateau. So if we mess up something like that, if we're predicting things really far out, it's not so good. If anybody like remembers from like health appraisal, whenever we were like bench pressing, like doing multiple reps on a bench press to predict a 1 repetition max, how accurate do you think a 20 rep bench press is on predicting a 1 rep max? It's garbage, right? How accurate is a 5? Like 5 reps. It's better. It's better. How accurate is a 3? It's better. Now, I mean, 2 or 1, well, obviously 1, that's actually the thing that you want to do. So, like, that's the thing with prediction that, like, I wanted to, you know, just kind of show to you. Because I think it's fairly fascinating that, I don't know, we'll say, oh, like, whatever place is going to be underwater by X date. Will it, though? I don't know. Like, it's very confusing. Like, the amount of doomsday predictors, like, in different, like, well, I don't know. A lot of people predicted that back in 2012, on my birthday, the world was going to end. Right? 2012? Yeah. It's like the Mayans or whatever. Yeah, like they were predicting way far out to predict 2012, and then like on my birthday, the world didn't end, or maybe it did, and this is all a dream. So that would be kind of cool. That's but you know,
When Y2K was supposed to shut the world down.
yes, I wish it would have. You know, then we wouldn't have Twitter, so that would be great. And I wouldn't have to be friends on Facebook with my grandma, but whatever. Okay, so here I was going to talk about the Big Five personality thing, but I'm not now. So here, I believe this is the last one. Control, so take into account an extraneous factor that might affect results when performing an experiment. If anybody had me in health appraisal, there's a particular thing that I always like to emphasize. So cigarette smoking causing cancer. Will everyone agree with that? Or it's related. Like there's never been an experiment showing direct causality, but it is related. However, there's a certain aerobic capacity where almost no matter how many cigarettes you smoke, you're not going to get cancer. And that's 8 METs. 8 METs, if your aerobic capacity is 8 METs. So if you control for like physical activity or aerobic fitness, then our whole relationship between cigarette smoking and cancer is different than what it actually is. Instead of smoking a whole pack a day, now we have to smoke 2 packs a day if we're like a certain level of like aerobic fitness, right? Cool. So like we have to be super careful whenever we look at things and whenever we think about things, because like controlling, this is probably the most important thing that science can do, or research can do, I mean. Okay, so here, let's move on to some types of variables. I'm going to tell you about a couple of these, and like there's the next 2 slides you don't have, so like write it down, or look at YouTube later. That's fine. It's and I'm sure it'll stick in there for you, so that's fine. Okay. So first things that we need to do, independent variable and dependent variable, those are probably the 2 most important flavors of variables that we need to know. So if you don't know what those are, here's an answer. So the independent variable always influences the change in the dependent variable. Dependent variables are almost always the outcome variables, things that we care about. Independent variables, things are things that we control, or that kind of just go without having to be controlled. So like time, for example, is the independent variable. So here, on this y equals mx plus b thing, this x-axis, that's the independent variable, or time. Now this y-axis is whatever you want to think about, like gaining weight, gaining muscle mass, like the sea levels, whatever you're interested in. That's how that goes. So write this down, or like at least be aware of it. So yeah, I said all that basically. So okay, cool. Moving on to the next thing. 2 other types of variables that are actually somewhat confusing to understand. And truthfully, I've always had issue with the mediator variable. I'll talk about that in a second. Dr. Lindsay Graviscus helped me understand it significantly better last semester sometime. It's so truthfully, like for so much of my life, I've just memorized what a mediator variable is. Like I've just memorized this definition and just like wrote that on tests, and I did good, or well, I mean. But here, let's look at this. So a moderator variable. This is essentially some type of like category. So it's a qualitative or quantitative variable that affects the direction and or strength of the relationship between an independent an independent or predictor variable and dependent on the criterion variable. So I don't worry about that example so much. I'll show you something that makes a little bit more sense. So next thing, mediator variable. It's a given variable, may be said to function as a mediator to the extent that it accounts for the relationship between the predictor and the criterion. So here's what I want you to look at. This figure makes a lot more sense to me. So let's start here at the bottom with moderation. So let's say that we have someone exercising at a given rate, say 100 watts. If all of a sudden we increase the workload to 1,000 watts, there can be an injury. So a moderator variable, in this case, would be level of aerobic fitness. So there'd be lower injury in high aerobic fit people, some injury in moderately aerobic fit people, and high levels of injury in low aerobic fit people. Is everyone good with this? So that's an example of a moderating variable. So the moderating variable is their level, kind of arbitrarily dictated level of aerobic fitness. Is everyone good with that? That makes sense? Okay, so mediation, this is more or less a correlation. At least that's what Dr. Graviscus, whenever she said it, it made sense to me. So, same thing, working at 100 watts, we increase it to 1,000 watts. And for whatever, we have super high-tech equipment, and we're able to measure your peripheral nervous system, what the firing rate is. So, mediation would be if we increase the workload spike, that goes up a lot. If we are detecting that your nervous system is really tired, it's firing much slower, and that accounts for the majority of the injury, meaning that the level of neuromuscular fatigue is correlated with the level of injury. That's more or less what a mediation is. Is everyone good with this? Okay, good. And since that's super complicated for me, that's not going to show up on a test. Cool? Good. So I like how Eric, it looked like you were confused for a second, and then whenever I said it's not on a test, cool, whatever. It's I see a lot of myself in you, Eric, and that's you're a lot taller, so that's good. Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. Not so good for me. Actually, you know what? It might be good for me because I don't know, there's less of my back to hurt, right? Because I don't have a lot of that. So here, let's move on to this. More variables. More variables. I want you to write down all of these. All of these. There's a bunch of them, right? So, Mike's a genius. Good. Yeah, taking pictures. Wonderful. All right, good. Well, actually, you know what? All this is going to be on YouTube eventually, so who cares? Right? Right, Storm? Yeah, nothing matters. Good. All right, so variables. Categorical variable. This first one, more or less putting people into categories. It's also called a nominal variable. That's going to show up on the next slide. So it is variables that can be put into categories. So, for example, toothpaste brands. Well, putting things into different categorical variables, that is related to the moderator variable that we were talking about on the last one. So the different categories: low fitness, medium fitness, high fitness, right? So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Other ones could be like race or ethnicity, gender or sex, like height, quartile or quintile. So that's kind of how that works. Confounding variable. This one is a huge deal for us. It's an extra variable that have a hidden effect on your experiment. So kind of like what I was talking about before, like with the relationship between cigarette smoking and cancer, a confounding variable would be their aerobic fitness. Maybe only people with really low aerobic fitness are actually getting cancer, which probably is true. Now, I mean, more research needs to be done on it, obviously, but that could be a confounding variable. Next thing, lurking variable. Very similar to a confounding variable. I want you to write this down, the difference between these two. A confounded variable is typically a variable that is actually known to the researchers and is measured. Frequently known, not always measured, but frequently known. A lurking variable is the same thing, and we use the word lurking to, it's hiding. The researchers don't really know about it. But effectively, it's the same thing. Right? Is everyone good with that? Everyone good with this? Okay, good. Next thing, a continuous variable. So it's just a variable with an infinite number of values. So like time or weight or something like that. A control variable, a factor in an experiment which must be held constant. So frequently, well, I don't know. With this control variable, with a lot of diabetes research, they'll have a certain amount of insulin stable, like, and then they'll have like a glucose infusion with a certain like control variable being insulin because they're interested in how like glucose interacts with a diabetic individual with a constant level of insulin. So that would be somewhat of an example of that. Dependent variable we already talked about. Discrete variable. So this, a variable that can only take on a certain number of values. So there's a finite number. So different than continuous. So those are kind of the two different poles. So one pole is discrete. There's only a certain set number of values that can happen. And a continuous variable, which is just on the other end of it, meaning there's an infinite amount. Cool. All right, good. Oh, yes, next one. Sorry, missed that one. A binary variable, or sometimes called a dichotomous variable. Any type of question research where there's like a yes, no, tall, short, just really like two different variables of something. Yeah, so yes, no, I think is good with that. Are y'all good with me moving on to the next slide? Everyone? Okay. Good. You good, Olivia?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Oh, latent variable. Dang. Okay, missed it. Oh, well, I mean, like Mike's taking pictures of it, so we're all good. All right. A latent variable. This is very common in like psychological things, and one of the groups is doing this in particular. So the personality group will, personality and like diet preference. So a latent variable is just a hidden variable that can't be measured or observed. So, for example, like say your intelligence. We can't measure your intelligence directly, but how we end up measuring intelligence is we have various battery or numerous tests that would take some cognitive functioning to do, and then we infer your intelligence mathematically from all of the different tests that we did. So like we would have like a simple reaction time test. We would have like how many like digits can you memorize? Like how well are you at guessing what like spatially a given shape will be in like a couple of turns? How good are you at like math? How good are you at like different verbal reasoning things? And then we aggregate all of these different things together in order to get a latent variable of intelligence. Is everyone good with this? That makes sense? Hopefully. Okay. All right. Moving on to the next slide. There's less on the next slide, so that's good. Okay. Here we go. Oh, there. All right. So nominal variable, essentially, that is just a categorical variable. I just want you to know that nominal variable is another term for it. An ordinal variable. It's similar to the categorical one, except there's a clear order to it. The classic example is individuals who run a race. First place, second place, third place, fourth place, all of that. That's an example of an ordinal variable. There's an order to them. Yeah, here, something that I wanted you to know, and like this will hop on to the next set of slides that you don't have, but you know, it will be on YouTube, so that's good. Qualitative variables, generally, these are nominal and ordinal variables. So, you know, categorizing something and then put in an order to it. However, the numbers really don't have any meaning, right? Outside of order, you know, hierarchy for the ordinal variable. Quantitative variable. Now these numbers are starting to have more meaning. There's going to be interval and ratio variables that, like I'm going to show you on this next slide. Cool. Everyone good with this? Almost? Okay. Just hurry up, Trent. I can't have too much dead air on YouTube. My 30 some odd subscribers are going to be mad. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. Okay. Some more of these. Levels of measurement. Some stuff that I want you to know very well. So, in terms of levels of measurement, there's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. So, nominal just means that the variables are named. Next, ordinal, they're named and their order is pertinent or relevant. Next, interval, meaning that they're named, ordered, and there's proportionate intervals between all of the different numbers. So, like, here's something to make a distinction between ordinal and interval. So, ordinal individuals who finish a race, if they finish first, second, and third, do I know how much that third was beat by first? Is there any interval there? Well, like, I have to tell you the times, right? I have to tell you the times, and that is actually going to end up being a ratio variable, right? Cool. So if I only tell you their order of finishing, there's no interval that is equivalent between those. Is everyone good with this? That makes sense? Now, ratio is named, ordered, proportionate, like variables, and have a 0. So here's something, for example. The classic illustration of an interval variable is temperature. So is there such thing as a 0 temperature? Like, does 0 actually mean anything? Or is that kind of like an arbitrary like point where, I don't know, like ice does whatever it does? Right? No. So I mean, like, there's like intervals between these. Now, like, technically, like, if we get like crazy nerdy about this, there actually is a 0 temperature, and it's like absolute 0 Kelvin, which is like, what is it, negative 273.5 degrees Celsius or something like that. So like that technically would be, but nobody else on the planet calls temperature a ratio variable, right? Because like in terms of Celsius or centigrade or Fahrenheit, there is no real 0 that we ever actually experience. Now this, I think, lets us know how this works relatively well. So if we go down, we add 1 for each level of this. So like I'd be aware of how this works. So scales of measurement, data, it's labeled. So labeled, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, all are labeled. Meaningful order. There's no meaningful order for nominal variables, right? So nominal variables being like race, ethnicity, like age group, anything like that. But ordinal, so on and so forth, measurable difference. There are measurable differences once we get to the interval level, and then there's a true 0 starting point for the ratio variables, however, not for the interval variables. Everyone good with this so far? I know this is getting boring, so I'm sorry. I'm going to try to go a little bit faster. All right. This, one of the biggest things in class that we have to know. I've been talking about like the dilution effect, cognitive overload, all of these different important things with science. You have to memorize this pyramid. You just have to. This is our hierarchy of evidence. So, at the top is meta-analyses and systematic reviews. After that is RCTs, or randomized control trials, which do come in some flavors. Like there's randomized control trials that have placebo controls, and there's some that are crossover, which would increase where they are within this RCT level. There's cohort studies, there's case control studies, there's cross-sectional studies, animal trials, and in vivo studies, or in vitro, meaning cell culture. And then at the very bottom, case reports, opinion papers, and letters. So we have to memorize this. And there was a particular student I had last semester that she came up with something kind of interesting with this. I don't know if it's like a mnemonic device to know all of this. Here, let's see if I can remember it. I met a random cohort of case-crossed animals who had opinions. If you want that, you can have it. Otherwise, just memorize it. Cool? Now, like probably the most difficult area to like actually get everything is within these the three C's right there. So cohort, case, and cross-sectional, like what order those are in. So anytime I've had tests before, those are the three that people like mix up a bunch. So be aware of that. So, does anybody like that like mnemonic device? Yeah, of course. Of course. I met a random cohort of case-crossed animals who had opinions. No, not a fan after the second time. Third time, would that be the charm? Yeah. No? All right. No, Eric doesn't want it. So if Eric doesn't want it, I won't do it because, you know, he's pretty cool. All right, so we've got a couple of minutes. So I'm going to try to get through as much as we possibly can. So case reports, like opinions, editorials, all of this different type of thing. Expert opinion is really the main part that I want you to know about. Case reports, we're going to read a case report. And well, here, let's talk about this. What are the dangers of a case report? Which a case report is just running a study on one person. Is everybody like that one person? No, of course not. That's why we do numerous people and we get averages. So that case report, that's wonderful for that one person. However, it's not very translatable. It has a very low what's called external validity, meaning translation outside of that singular setting. Good? Now, expert opinion, this one, if you have nothing else, going with an expert is like a really cool thing. If anyone's ever like read Dante's Inferno, like one of the first things in there, like Virgil said, follow the expert, and that's what Dante did, like through hell, like he did that. So that was kind of cool. I didn't plan on saying that before class, but that's just where my mind went. So okay, moving on. Virgil, yeah, yeah. It's Can you all tell I don't have friends, right? Okay. Yeah, no, I mean it is, you know, but you know, Purgatorio and Paradiso are pretty good too. Okay, so this is the thing that any of you who are smart, be super aware of this, right? Right. So pay attention, Eric. Right? Because like everyone knows. So problems with expert opinion. Frequently, whenever someone's an expert, they think they're an expert at a bunch of different things. Now, myself in particular, my expertise is crazy narrow. Like, should you care who I'm going to vote for in the election? Of course not. Now, I'm right, and you know probably no one else is. But like that's, see, like that's what experts do. So we have a lot of bias, we have a lot of confirmation bias, and there's this actually super interesting thing that intelligence can exacerbate something called motivated reasoning. So motivated reasoning is essentially reasoning to get the conclusion that you want. So if you answer that phone, yeah, no, I mean that was pretty good, but like, I mean, really, if you're gonna go to the NFL, I would expect faster reactions than that. But like, yeah. It's just do what like I don't know Randy Moss used to do, and like don't try ever. Okay, moving on. Okay, so here's the thing: motivated reasoning. That is essentially coming to the conclusion that you already wanted. It's also called confirmation bias. So smart or very intelligent individuals, so individuals who are experts in a given field, can frequently argue either side about something, right? So be wary of that, especially whenever experts really talk about anything. So like be wary of that whenever I'm talking, right? Of course, because like I'm super biased on a lot of stuff. For example, one of the biases that like I always come to is smoking probably isn't that bad. Like almost nothing really matters that much, and anytime like research shows anything, it's just like, well, I don't know, like they probably didn't control for the right things. That's how I view the world, right? So having a conversation with me is hard because it's just like, oh no, like there's that hole in what you're saying, there's that hole in what you're saying. So like other experts do this crap too. So like be wary of like expert opinions. So moving on from that, animal trials and in vitro research. So all of this is just things done, cell culture, done on animals, frequently done to derive a mechanism. Now here, and this is like motivated reasoning because, you know, like I'm intelligent, or actually like I've done a lot of this stuff. So I say don't be too skeptical of it, because all of us, we would be like, hey, yeah, we're nothing like mice or like rats or anything. Did you know that like mice like laugh whenever they get tickled? Like all of you. Right? Just you can't hear it because your ears suck and mice ears are really good, right? So yeah, like you don't see a lot of those things. Like did you know that like mice mothers really like their like sons and daughters, or like pups, whatever they're called, right? Like you would, right? I don't know. They like food, just like all of you. Like they like Culvers just as much as the next person. Now here, like how most cells work, you know, our muscles are very similar. You know, our brains are actually somewhat similar. That might be the area where we're the most different. But animals aren't people. Here, one day in class, I said that we're 97% the same genetically as rats. I was a bit off. Now, what I wanted you to know, 98% the same as a chimp, right? 92% the same as a mouse. That was the figure I was trying to remember right, but I was 5 off. So my bad.
Would a rat and mouse be different?
Like we're actually closer in terms of rat, but like I don't have the figures exactly. So it's yeah, like I don't know. I would assume probably like 94, say, or whatever. So like yeah, we're more rats than anything like that. But there's that, and here next time we'll start talking about cross-sectional studies, because everyone already packed up before class was over, but whatever.